Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Luzanne Lottering. I am the marketing manager here at Cardiolog Analytics, and I'm joined today by Microsoft MVP and SharePoint performance expert, Sean McDonough. And I will go ahead and kick things off. So today's webinar is the A to Z of improving overall SharePoint online performance. I'm going to start off with a bit of housekeeping. So just so you know, this webinar is being recorded, and if you want to share this with a colleague, you will go ahead and send an email with the recording after today's session. And of course, if you have any questions, please send them through the questions box within the GoToWebinar panel, and hopefully we'll have some time towards the end for Q&A. But if not, we will reach out to those who ask questions. You can also connect with us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @Cardiolog, or you can connect with Sean using the Twitter handle @SBMcDonough. So, in regards to the agenda for today's webinar, we will start out with a very short introduction. I will talk a bit about Cardiolog Analytics and who we are, and then I will hop over to our analytics solution for SharePoint Online and walk you through how you can not only track user performance by looking into their usage and productivity in SharePoint, but also how you can leverage our engagement solution to encourage users to use SharePoint to its full potential, but also to get feedback from users regarding performance issues so action can be taken. And then Sean will go ahead, introduce himself, and dive deeper into the topic of improving SharePoint online performance, and also share his expertise in order to help you get the most out of SharePoint Online. By the way, early 2021, we will have part 2 in which we will collaborate again to focus on SharePoint on-prem performance. And then at the end of this webinar, like I said, if we have time, we'll be taking some Q&A. So please feel free to send your questions throughout the course of the presentation. So I'll start off with a brief introduction. Cardiolog Analytics has been around for about 15 years now, since 2005, and we are based out of Boston. So over the last 15 years, we've been focused on analytic and engagement design for SharePoint with Teams and Office 365. Our flagship solution is Cardiolog Analytics, and it's built specifically for internal platforms, including all versions of SharePoint from 2010 to 2019, as well as what we are talking about today, SharePoint Online, and then also Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, Exchange. And our solution, as you would have noticed by now, is available both on-prem and as a SaaS version based on Power BI. So many organizations are facing problems with SharePoint Online performance. And for many of them, there's a lack of portal engagement since the users are not using their SharePoint environment to its full potential. So I will begin by showing you how unique SharePoint usage reports teamed up with an engagement solution that asks questions and asks users for feedback can give you all of the in-depth insights and tools you need to improve portal usability and also to drive your users' productivity and performance even further. So let me show you these metrics that your organization should track in order to drive user performance and productivity in SharePoint, because you can't really improve if you don't monitor something. So here you can first of all see the SharePoint tree structure, where I can track as many environments as I like. And you can see that we do track both online as well as on-prem. So in this particular overview dashboard, we are seeing data about content. We're seeing data about adoption, about search. So if you first of all look here under content, you can see the most active or the most popular content based on these page view numbers. And the whole point is that once you know about it, you can launch a campaign and make sure that people are in fact aware of that wonderful new HR site, or like I said, that important policy. But very important, you can also flip that around. And now we are showing all the inactive content. So that's the content not being used often or not at all. And that could be whether it's sites or documents or pages and more. So all the unused content. And the point is that once you know about that, you are empowered to take action and make the improvements needed, whether it's deleting it, archiving it, notifying everyone about it, or adding a link from the homepage perhaps, or even launching a campaign. And all of this is in order to prove the site performance. So that's the action we can take based on what's most popular and also the unused content. But besides that, we can see more information, like everything from who owns this content to the size, and that also helps you take action. For example, with really large content, the admin can find out who owns this and contact that person who is the owner of the content and tell that owner that they have, for example, 60 days to get rid of it or take action to improve it, or I will simply delete this content. If we go back to report and we hop into search optimization. So this search optimization report contains many widgets ready to give you an informative picture of how users search on your site. So this report can be used to better understand your users' behavior and in order to make those improvements based upon intelligent data in order to enhance SharePoint performance. We look over here with the word cloud. You can track the topics your users are searching for, what they need help with, and what interests them. For example, is everyone looking for the same document or for the same page? If that is the case, it would be best to surface that content so it's easier to find in order to improve the performance. So here on the left, you can see the top search term, in this case, business data. So if everyone in the company is searching for the term business data, let's filter the entire dashboard by that one search term. And now you can see, finally, that this search term has been searched over 1,600 times. And if you multiply that by over 60 seconds per search, that is a lot of time wasted looking for one piece of content or one search term. But now that we know about it, we might add a link from the homepage with the employee benefits, and that will save a lot of wasted time. It will obviously improve overall productivity in the organization, adoption as well. Total successful versus failed searches. This chart shows a comparison of all searches that returned at least one link, so those will be the successful ones, to all the searches that returned 0 results, the failed searches. So this is something that is quite concerning. This is a high failed search rate. So that means that only half of those users actually clicked on the result. And that means that even more time is being wasted as well. But once we have the data, we have a way of making improvements. Still on the topic of successful versus failed searches, this line chart shows those results over time. So it compares all searches that return at least one link, like I said, the successful searches, to all searches that return 0 results, those failed ones, over a selected period of time. And the whole point is that this chart helps to identify if visitors find what they search for, or if changes in the website have affected user ability to search effectively. You can also click on failed searches, and you can find out which of these terms people are having the most challenges with. And a failed search is one that obviously retrieves 0 results. So if I search for holiday calendar, all the results retrieved weren't relevant. So I went and searched again. And the whole idea here is that people are wasting time and they cannot find what they're looking for. Again, once you know what they are looking for, you can then surface that and save a lot of time. And you may need to also look more in depth into your search schema or queries in order to improve them as well. And just to let you know, you can also, if you look at the date range here, you can also filter that by the date range and again choose specific areas and content types to filter by as well. And that impacts everything you see here. If I hop into portal responsiveness, This report provides a comprehensive overview of how quickly users access your site. So when I hover the cursor over most widgets, you will see that it displays further information such as average page request time by device. So this pie chart displays the average time in milliseconds it takes for your site to receive and to respond to a user's request, depending on the user's device, obviously. And once the page requested has been completed, the page begins loading on the user's browser. You can also see average page request time by browser, that's quite a tongue twister, as well as average page load time. Average page load time is the average time it takes for a page to become fully functional for a user. You can also see the average page request time, and you can even see the page load time by country, which is really helpful and really interesting if you have offices across many different countries. Sean will obviously go into more detail about how to improve this slow page load time. So let's look at responsiveness and hop into slow pages before I hop into the engagement part, so you can see how to use this data in order to drive users to perform better and to be more productive. So the slow pages report template identifies the pages on your site that take the longest to be displayed to your users. If there's a lot of content loaded by the site owner of a single page, then it would obviously cause that page to take many seconds to load. And that could be a reason no one is adopting their content. But once they're aware of that, that's when we are able to take action and make those improvements. And these performance issues all impact adoption in a negative way, as you've heard, because if it's difficult for me to find content, I'm not going to be very eager to come back and use this technology again. Let me quickly hop into Cardiolog Engage and show you how to use Cardiolog Engage to drive productivity in SharePoint and get insights regarding performance directly from users. So the first step with Cardiolog Engage will decide what your goal is. Do you want to ask people what they were looking for, ask people if they found what they were looking for, or just get feedback on what the challenges are for them? So you will set your goal, or you can skip that and create your own goal. Your next step will then be, who should receive this? Who are you trying to engage with? Who is your audience? Is it those users who interacted or answered any question? The next step will be, how do I want to engage with these users? I want to engage with these users. Maybe I want to send them a message right within SharePoint. It will pop up as a header or footer. And here I can remind specific users of SharePoint, people in a specific department. Based on all the data that I've just shown you, you can reach out to specific people and specific departments and specific groups and tell them about content that has been moved, tell them about search results that you have seen are not very efficient and people are not taking advantage of content on the site. And you can tell them exactly how you would want them to react with the SharePoint site in order for them to be more productive and more collaborative. And that will obviously help the overall performance of the SharePoint site. So you can then send them a message either as a full screen or, as I've said, a header or a footer. And this message will show up right within the SharePoint page. Say, for example, you do want to get feedback directly from these users and you want to send a message to every single user. In that case, your call to action will be an open question. And then when the users get the specific question, if you're asking them, is there something you are searching for that you're not getting the search result? Is there something, can I get some feedback on what the challenges are for you in SharePoint? You can ask them if they found what they were looking for. And then with this particular call to action, you can get feedback and these insights directly from the users, which is really neat. And this message will be sent to them immediately. It can be scheduled to be sent to them at a specific date or time, or it can be triggered based on their behavior. So when they are scrolling down a specific page in SharePoint, or viewing a specific page, or interacting with a specific page, or performing a search even, that is a great trigger because that is usually when they have those performance issues. The combination of the analytics and the engagement part really helps to get this very valuable insights from users in order for the organization to take action in order to drive that performance. I will now go ahead and hand things over to Sean, who will then introduce himself and jump into the presentation.
Thanks, Luzon. My name is Sean McDonough. I'm a consultant with Bitstream Foundry, and this is the A to Z of improving overall SharePoint Online performance. So a little bit about me quickly. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio, a bit down the road from Boston, Massachusetts. I've been working with SharePoint since 2004, and anyone who goes back that far knows that's the Portal Server 2003 days. Some would call them the dark ages of SharePoint. I've been in Office Apps and Services MVP for the last 5 years or so. I have a wonderful wife, twin middle schoolers who are going to high school next year, so we live a very busy life here. I am a little bit more information, electronic music lover, DJ, yearly mix creator, and we're getting to the time of the year when I make my mixes. So if you go to bunkertunage.com if you're interested in sampling some new music. A big video gamer, augmented reality, virtual reality proponent, and I tell people I'm a basement data center admin and operator. I've got some info on my blog about that, which we will cover a little bit later. I also like to tell people that I am a true donut junkie. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a victim to a good cup of coffee and donuts. And anyone who's ever seen the Red Green Show on PBS, I tend to tell people I'm not handsome, but handy. So tape is a handyman's secret weapon, and any tool can be the right tool, of course. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the differences between SharePoint Online and on-prem, cover briefly why they make a difference to us. We've had a variety of tools and techniques at our disposal for performance issues. We'll talk about some scalability mechanisms and what we need to know and why it's important to know how SharePoint Online functions. We'll go into some site building guidance, things to do and things to avoid. Talk briefly towards the end about options for tough performance problems. And at the end, I'll have wrap up and contact information, including links to my blog, and if you want to get a hold of me. So moving forward, jumping in, SharePoint Online versus on-premises. And the big question, does it matter? Well, you could probably guess the answer to this one. Of course it matters. It matters for a variety of reasons. To think about SharePoint in the cloud in the same terms that we think about SharePoint on premises can get us into trouble. But users have similar performance expectations regardless of where SharePoint runs. The only difference for us, really, it's a big one, but what we can see and what we can control or influence varies by whether we're on-prem or in the cloud. When we're on-prem, the benefit of being on-prem, one of the few remaining benefits these days, is we own all the plumbing, the servers, the network, etc., and we have complete control over every configuration item. So some would say you are the master of your own domain, and on premises we are in charge of everything. We also have full diagnostic information in terms of logs and performance counters. We also have the option, if we choose to do it, to install and implement additional troubleshooting tools. Now, when we contrast that with SharePoint Online or any cloud-based SharePoint operation, the first thing to note is we are no longer living in a house, we're living in an apartment building. We're in a shared environment, and oftentimes direct access to hardware, associated diagnostic info and counters isn't possible. That information isn't exposed to us. And even though Microsoft has done a better job out making various logs and bits of what would typically be administrative information available to us over the years, we do not have direct access or control of any of the underlying hardware. There are also greater performance variations, both sources of performance variation and actual effects. The biggest thing people had trouble with initially with the cloud was, who do I call if it goes down? We're paying Microsoft to administer our environment with SharePoint Online, but there's something to be said for having the guy down in the IT office that you can yell at when things don't go well. Well, performance variation affects a variety of different things, from operational effects down to performance of the actual environment. Performance troubleshooting and remediation oftentimes has to be done differently relative to what we do on-prem. These limited log views and limited metrics we have available to us mean that we have to employ some techniques that are rather indirect in nature. We get into sleuthing quite a bit. Now, I mentioned that I know Luzon mentioned initially that we'll talk about on-premises in another webinar next year. Today, we're going to be focused squarely on SharePoint Online and how to make an impact performance-wise and to understand performance there. So what I tell people with SharePoint Online is grab your magnifying glass and put on your Sherlock Holmes gear. The limited information and restricted controls typically require, like I said, creative solutions and approaches to performance problems. Now, there are still, I like to tell people, in any sufficiently, dark art situation, there's no need to light candles and sacrifice chickens here. We're still using scientific, objective approaches, problem solving. It's just we tend to use inference through end user mechanisms and tools that are available to us. So what is out is direct configuration and admin control, and what is in as adopted thinking pattern is thinking as an end user and what they observe. So dealing with potential performance problems that we might troubleshoot on premises, we have less option there. And generally speaking, in the online environment, dealing with performance issues after they arise, reacting to them, is not great. What's better and what is more effective for us to do in the situation with online services like SharePoint Online is to use our knowledge of the service and how it behaves to avoid performance problems in the first place. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's certainly true with SharePoint Online. So let's talk about some of the tools at our disposal. The end user mindset. So at the beginning of the day, or at the end of the day rather, performance is performance is performance. And as long as we take care of page performance from the end user's perspective, that's the one thing that matters. They want their pages snappy. They don't care what's going on or why it misbehaves. Just make it perform well. So page performance is the one thing. And as long as we cover that, we're good. Of course, the cruel corollary to this is, or what I call the end user curse, users see every sort of problem as a page performance issue. The site's not performing well, and they tend to kitchen sink different problems into the category of performance. So to an end user, there really is no difference between a poor experience that arises from a slow server or a poorly designed and performing JavaScript running on their browser on their machine. They see the result of that, which is perhaps a slow loading page or what appears to be a slow loading page, and thus it's a performance issue. So the end user doesn't really care why their performance or experience is poor, and in their defense, they really shouldn't have to care. There are plenty of things that we can do to address the performance perception at all levels with SharePoint Online and SharePoint On-Prem. We just need to take the blinders off and adopt a broader view of what performance really means in the grand scheme of things. So a brief history of tools and data analysis, very brief, I should say. In the past, when we've been trying to analyze slow SharePoint pages, it would require a special set of tools. Anyone who's tried to do this has probably used something like a Tellerik's Fiddler tool. to look at client-server dialogues between their web browser and the web front end. Eventually, F12 browser debugging tools in Internet Explorer, in Edge, in Chrome, and Firefox, and every major browser. Those tools got good enough that we didn't have to rely on Fiddler for most things that we wanted to look at with regard to client-server interactions. If we needed to get deep into the weeds, we might pull out something like a protocol analyzer like Wireshark for low-level packet analysis. This might be used to resolve DNS issues, DNS lookups, other sorts of protocol-specific problems if we've narrowed it down that far, but we normally didn't have to dive this low. Now, I may be speaking a foreign language to some of you, and I have to say that that's fair for most folks. Average end users don't need to interpret or understand things like HTTP codes, response headers, SharePoint interaction patterns, the march of acronyms, XML, HTML, JSON, REST, other message formats. These are all things we really need to know at some level to implement effective performance troubleshooting with SharePoint Online, or at least this is what we needed to know. So back in those dark ages, performance troubleshooting was dark art or required an advanced degree, at least felt like it. You'd need good data and experience, more than a little luck, at least this is how it felt. So the conclusion, performance troubleshooting was not for the faint of heart. The nice thing is enough people made a ruckus about performance. Microsoft is constantly changing and adding. In 2018, something miraculous happened. And this is where we entered the age of enlightenment from a tools perspective. Microsoft acknowledged, yes, performance troubleshooting, performance tuning is a challenge. They had guidance for us, but we really had a lack of automated tooling. Microsoft in 2018 released the page diagnostics tool for SharePoint, the first version of that. And it was demonstrated, sort of, I say sort of because the SharePoint conference in 2018, Scott Stewart from Microsoft and I were on the stage presenting on SharePoint performance, and the tool was his baby. He presented it and he had demo demons. So that's why I say sort of demoed it. But Microsoft, since that time, over the last roughly 3 years, they've continued to evolve the tool. We've come a long way since version 1.0. Version 1.0 only handled classic SharePoint pages. At that time in 2018, modern pages were quickly becoming the preferred way to build SharePoint online sites and environments. Modern pages, Microsoft had committed to moving modern pages forward, and though it wasn't going to remove classic pages, clearly their attention and focus was on modern pages. Now with the SharePoint page diagnostics tool, the current version where we're at is version 2.1.3. This was just released sometime, I think, in the last month. I track the versioning pretty regularly, and they've done a pretty good job. In fact, they've done an excellent job of integrating the most relevant and recent guidance. So we'll talk about the tool a little bit more, but it continues to evolve. And Microsoft, like I said, is investing in the tool. For example, the tool, they're starting to depend on the tool for some of their own operations. So for instance, if you have a classic page at the root of your site, or a classic site at the root of your intranet namespace in SharePoint Online, if you want to do a root site swap to move over to a modern page look and feel, well, for large organizations, they actually have to get a clean bill of health with the page diagnostics tool. And so this presentation, there's a link there. When I make this available, you'll be able to use the link to go out and check it for more information. So the page diagnostics tool for SharePoint. This replaces the need for nearly all tools and an advanced degree. Some highlights of the tool. It's a free extension. It's kind of ironic that initially the tool was available only for Google Chrome. Microsoft wanted to bring it out for Edge prior to Edge adopting a Chromium base, but it never made it to the Edge market. So for the longest time, SharePoint's only diagnostic tool by Microsoft was available for Google Chrome only, and that gets a chuckle sometimes. One button to start and analyze page performance. The results you get are not in some cryptic technical jargon. It's plain English. The tool includes a plethora of rules and checks, and each of the rules that get run, anytime they return a less than stellar result, the wonderful thing about this tool, and it's one of the best aspects of it, is there's a direct link from the tool result to Microsoft Docs online. So as each of these run and you get questionable results, you can go look at the extensive docs explaining why the tool might have given you a negative response or what you need to do to fix it. For those who still like to inflict damage on themselves, you can export the raw data from the tool's run. And like I said, there's no expertise required to run this tool. It's really as simple as clicking a start button. So this is solidly an end user tool, at least in terms of ease of use and accessibility, and it's an admin tool. You do not require special rights to run this tool. And in fact, it will yell at you if you try to run as an admin because that changes the results. So this will become the #1 thing for doing performance diagnosis in SharePoint Online in your tool chest if it isn't already. So how do you get the tool? Well, go to your browser's extension store, search for Page Diagnostics. It'll probably pop up near the top or at the top of the list of tools returned or extensions returned. Install it. Now make sure you accept the permission grants because it does need some elevated permissions within your browser in order to operate. And once it's installed, this extension icon will appear at the top of your browser. And to use it, as I said, it's as simple as launching the extension. The main tool dialog will appear, which looks like the dialog on the right, and you click the start button. It's as simple as that. Now, when the tool starts running, it's going to clear an established browser state needed for a clean test. The dialog will display a progress bar. It will show that it's what it's doing, collecting data, interacting with the server. And while the tool is running, it's actually loading your page in the background and monitoring the series of interactions, the HTTP dialog between your browser and the SharePoint web front end. Once the data is collected, rules and analysis is applied, and then you shift over to this view, which is the results view. And the dialog has two different tabs. The first tab is the diagnostic tests result tab, and we can clearly see that in the case of this example, most of the tests that ran against the page I was testing came back pretty good. I had a small page weight, fewer than 25 SharePoint requests to retrieve all the content. But one thing the tool yelled at me for was the fact that I wasn't using public and private content delivery networks, or CDNs. We'll talk a little bit more about CDNs, but this gives us the view we need to understand what at a high level might need to change in our pages and what we're actually doing well. Now, the other thing I want to point out is at the top of the dialog, you get things like an SP request duration, SPIIS latency, page load time. These are critical numbers that I use to apply what I call the equation. And I want to spend just a second talking about that because the equation gives you a good idea of where you might be losing performance and cycles in the whole page request cycle. So if we think about this, our computer is interacting with a SharePoint web front end out in the cloud. We issue a page request and we get a response from the web front end. Now, when our computer issues a page request, it starts timing the interaction. And oftentimes, this is the start of timing for most of the timing calculations that will be performed with regard to our request. Our request goes out, reaches the server, the web front end, and we would like to think that our request gets processed automatically right away, but that's not necessarily the case. Remember, SharePoint Online is a multi-tenant environment. So our request to get through the page processing pipeline might have to basically take a number at the deli counter and wait its turn. The amount of time our request spends waiting on the server to be processed is known as the SPIIS latency value. And that's the amount of time in milliseconds that our request spends waiting before the server begins acting on it. Now, once we've reached our position in line and we start processing, we have a number called SP request duration. That's the amount of time in milliseconds that our request spent being processed and a page generated by the server. So this is the end-to-end processing time on the server itself. And once that request is completely fulfilled and we've got a page to send back, the web front end returns it to the browser, and then we stop the clock. So if we think about this, our end-to-end cycle, this is reported as page load time. Oftentimes it's timed at first byte on our page itself. Now, of course, our series of interactions with the server is going to involve a bunch of other things like images, CSS, JavaScript, etc. But our page load time specifically is that time where we end up waiting after sending the request and the first byte coming back to us. Now, to apply an equation, we got to take all of these numbers together, and the equation, what it actually helps us try to visualize, or kind of like wetting our finger, putting it in the wind, is it taking a long time for our page to process? Are we losing time on the network perhaps, or maybe a combination of the two? So if we take our page load time end to end, and we then subtract from that the amount of time that the request spends on server, either waiting or processing, it generates what I like to call TLE, or time lost elsewhere. So if we have a high TLE value, but our request duration and latency are relatively low, that speaks to a potential problem somewhere else in the system, in the network, in the routing, DNS lookups, what I would call, other things outside of SharePoint Online. However, if our page load time is roughly equivalent to our request duration, well, we've got, very little time being lost on the network. Now, if we have a very large page load time, and the largest portion of that is our request duration, well, then we actually have something going on the server that we need to troubleshoot. So just to wrap up, a page diagnostics tool, we can also export the data. There's a, it goes in HAR, which is HTTP archive, which is a JSON format, kind of looks like this. But that tool will give us what we need to more or less figure out what's going on at a high level with our SharePoint pages. So what do we need to know in terms of SharePoint Online? So I talked about the cloud performance mindset, and the tools we've talked about so far, which is largely the page diagnostics tool. It's it's a valid approach, troubleshooting problems. It tends to be more effective on premises, though it is worth noting the page diagnostics tool only runs in SharePoint Online. But ultimately, this is a reactive approach. We need something to go wrong first before we can actually look at the problem. Ideally, we want to move from a reactive to a proactive approach, prevent problems from happening in the first place. We do that by creating service and conditions and the way we handle certain site events in a way that more or less allows us to work with the cloud-based system rather than against it. And so some basic knowledge here goes a very long way, and pardon the bad G.I. Joe reference there at the bottom. So understanding the SharePoint Online service. SharePoint Online is an elastic service like most cloud services. And it has an extensive degree of automated monitoring and automated control systems built into it. Now, whenever the SharePoint Online service encounters sustained increases in load, and the load stays high, it used to be Microsoft would target a 40% average CPU utilization rate on web front-end servers in SharePoint Online. When that went above 40% significantly for a period of time, what would end up happening is there would be a process that would respond to that, and an automated provisioning would kick in to add additional web front ends to the SharePoint Online environment. The process worked in reverse as well. If suddenly you had excessive headroom for a long period of time, it might pull machine or hardware out of the environment in order to use hardware and time more effectively with regard to the service. This provisioning process and deprovisioning process isn't an instantaneous thing, though. It does take an amount of time, although not a lot of time. Now, we can use this information proactively. If we're launching new sites, new portals where we expect to more or less turn on additional users to a site or page, it's ideal if we don't turn that on for everyone or make everyone aware of it at once. We slowly increase the load by rolling out to different waves of users. What this does is it allows the automated provisioning mechanisms to detect load increase and go about the process of adding additional capacity to the environment, so we ramp up slowly without everybody hitting the service at once and bringing it to its knees. So we use automated provisioning in our favor, and I've got a bunch of links here at the bottom that provide additional detail on that, as well as other portal guidance. Practical service differences that we need to be aware of. Many of you have probably worked with large SharePoint farms like the one on the right in the past. There are many different SharePoint farm topologies with a variety of server going into them. 1 or 2 dozen SharePoint servers might be considered a large environment. And it's easy to think of SharePoint Online like that. Maybe it's 3 dozen servers or something else. But in reality, SharePoint Online and environment, or what they call a stamp sometimes, or basically it's the cloud farm, is multi-tenant. You've got hundreds or thousands of organizations in that tent with you. And there are literally hundreds, you know, not ones, not tens, but hundreds of web front ends per farm. Are commonplace, and that's to service the load for the user base. What does that mean to us in terms of practical service differences? Well, SharePoint on-prem relies on server-based caching mechanisms to achieve acceptable performance for some features. Sheer scale of SharePoint Online's implementation limits or renders ineffective these mechanisms in a large number of cases. So if we think about the case of a user on the right going out through a load balancer in an on-prem environment, they might have 2 web front ends in their environment. Their chance of hitting one box over the other box is 50%, 1 out of 2. This, lends itself well to caching. We have fewer sites and site collections on-prem, relatively speaking. So caches can fill up, and the chances of users hitting those servers with cached content work for us. Now, when we go to something like SharePoint Online, this is a case of just 50 web front ends. I don't have hundreds here, but 50 web front ends. Now, if a user's going out to SharePoint Online with 50 web front ends in the SharePoint Online farm, the chance of hitting any one server that might have cached content that they care about is roughly 2%. If you've got 50 web front ends, 1 in 50 is 2%. And that's reflected by the green server there. If we look at the, you might wonder what's the red server? Well, since so many users and so many organizations are using the same hardware, nothing stays in cache long, if at all, on a SharePoint web front end and SharePoint Online. So even though I might hit a server like the one in red, which had our content on it, memory pressure might have forced it out before we end up hitting that server again. So for all intents and purposes, server-based web front-end caching mechanisms just don't exist in SharePoint Online. That's what Microsoft has said. It's effectively non-existent. Don't even rely on server-based caching mechanisms. Now, any sites or mechanisms that rely on server-based caching naturally take a hit as a result of this. Something like structural navigation. In the case of SharePoint on-prem, the object cache, which is one of SharePoint's basic caching mechanisms, stores a sitemap. That sitemap is expensive to compute, or rather expensive to compute. And with each node in your site hierarchy that you add, building that sitemap necessitates 8 SQL round-trip calls by SharePoint. So as you increase your site expanse and depth, you increase your performance degradation linearly. So Microsoft right off the bat says, do not use structural navigation in SharePoint Online. Use managed navigation, search-based navigation. These techniques are discussed and examples given out on Microsoft Docs and Portal Health. The newest replacement option, which rolled out relatively recently, is called cache structural navigation. That's usually the best option for folks. So you want to use that if it's available to you, and it should be to everyone at this point. Folks who like the content by query web part, they like their list rollups and whatnot. Well, the object cache is used to store those query results because, again, cross-list queries are expensive to run. No object cache basically means you're rerunning those queries on every single page generation, which is not ideal. What can you do? Well, in all but only a few edge cases, you can replace the content query web part with the content search web part. Search is very fast and very capable, both in SharePoint on-prem and online, but particularly in the online environment, it allows us to get around what would be a performance block. Things like the binary large object cache, this is something that's enabled with publishing. Microsoft also says don't enable publishing in your SharePoint Online environments unless you absolutely need some aspect of them, because that HTTP module instantly costs you 100 to 200 milliseconds in processing. The lesser issue here is, it's a lesser issue, but in most cases, we can offload to a content delivery network. And while we're talking about that, Microsoft is pushing CDNs very hard, and the page diagnostics tool will yell at you if you do not use them. There are a bunch of different ways to employ CDNs. Microsoft is its own first-party provider for CDNs now. They used to rely exclusively on Akamai, but now the Azure CDN network serves up Microsoft 365 content. The performance increase can be truly dramatic. I wrote a blog post on this, as well as all the different ways that CDNs can help you. So you want to check that out. But Microsoft, they've said, if anything, one takeaway from any performance talk at this point in time should be implement CDNs. So just a little site building guidance. I know we're getting short on time here. Many people build SharePoint Online sites the same way that they build on-premises sites. They take things for granted like latency, bandwidth, instantaneous response processing, and return. LAN environment can mask lots of bad decisions when it comes to site building. And these problems commonly fall into the categories too many, too big, too many calls to the server, too many files referenced on pages. Files and resources referenced are larger than they should be. So what you do in the cloud, here's a list of points. I'll just call out some of the highlights. Again, CDNs, you get a big bang for a CDN buck here. One bigger call is better than a lot of smaller little calls for latency reasons, if nothing else. And one thing I like to point out, sprite sheets are not familiar to many different folks, but sprite sheets allow you to place many different images on one larger image canvas, and through CSS techniques, create little windows onto that image, kind of like postage stamps on a page. So by downloading this one image, you can imagine that any of those icons that are needed in a page can be reused from this one image. The benefit of using one image over many, we only pay the cost of latency once. So not a lot of back and forth with the server. Shrink your files, particularly images. I like to tell people don't fall victim to grandma's emailed picture syndrome. You know, when your grandma got her first digital camera and she was sending family photos that were megabytes in size long before email could handle megabytes. Resize your images to usage sizes, minify, JavaScript, CSS, all sorts of different techniques. You'll have this presentation available afterwards, so you can look at these and ask me about them if you have specific questions. Microsoft also has Stream now, Office 365 rather, most Microsoft plans come with Stream. So you can stream content instead of forcing entire downloads of things like video files. Now, let's say you get a tough performance problem. You might need to call for backup. If you encounter performance issues, the common response is to blame or assume it's a SharePoint Online issue. Reality, sadly, in the overwhelming majority of cases, it's not SharePoint Online. The corollary to this is that means it's something to do with your site. Rarely it will be a SharePoint Online issue. I would suggest doing as much as you can to troubleshoot and remediate. We've barely touched on the role of LAN and WAN environments as well as general network issues. Many SharePoint problems turn out to be network issues once you dig a little deeper. Do not be afraid to involve Microsoft support. If you can, do what you can to troubleshoot. They'll be certainly appreciative of if you just don't call them and say, SharePoint Online's broken, make my page faster. You're not going to endear yourself to anyone. And doing your part will also expedite analysis and resolution by them. So to wrap things up, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming to the talk. I know we're out of time. I'll leave my information up here for a few seconds. If you want to learn more about me specifically, I kind of put like a little bio out at spmcdonough.com. My blog is sharepointinterface.com. That's where you'll find lots of different caching and performance related articles. You can reach me at Sean@sharepointinterface.com if you want to send an email. I'm also on LinkedIn, and as Luzon said earlier, I'm at spmcdonough on Twitter. And I thank you for attending today, and I'm going to hand things back over to Luzon.
Thanks, Sean, for all that not only interesting but very helpful information. And
Sure.
I quickly just want to tell all of you that are still with us that you can email info@info.com after this webinar for a free one-on-one evaluation session with Cardiolog Analytics and with Sean himself, and you can get guidance on just some of the things that were discussed today, or maybe there's something else you want to talk to us or to Sean about. We are just about out of time, so I'm going to wrap up our session today. If anyone's had any questions, we will get back to you regarding those questions in the next day or two. We will get in touch with you. And again, Sean, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise and valuable information, as I said, about SharePoint performance, especially the page diagnostics tool. And then as a reminder, we have recorded this webinar and we will be sending out a recording, and then you can share that with your colleagues who may be unable to attend. And we invite you to visit us at cardiologanalytics.com. You can book your free demo for SharePoint on-prem. You can book a demo for Cardiolog Analytics, so we can show you how our analytics capabilities can help you drive adoption and consumption in Teams, in Yammer, in OneDrive, in Exchange. And then you can also reach out to us if you want a free trial. And you can also, like Sean and I already told you, you can tweet us, and for more information and any other helpful tips, you can check out our blog as well as Sean's blog. Ours is at blog.cardiologanalytics.com and Sean's blog is sharepointinterface.com, or just contact us directly and we can get back to you regarding anything that you would maybe hop on a call about. So that is all. Thank you very much for everyone who joined, and we look forward to having you join us again early next year when we will do the same, but with the focus on SharePoint on-prem. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.